Hi everybody! Today's video is going to be an introduction to Adobe Photoshop. So today we're going to dip our toes into Adobe Photoshop. Some of you may already have some experience with this program, and some of you, this program might be brand new to you. So for today's demonstration, I'm just going to give you a tour of the work area, point out some important tools for making selections in Adobe Photoshop, and also just explain to you the different ways that you can make selections in Adobe Photoshop. So it's quite different than what we're used to in Adobe Illustrator, where all of the graphics or the visual elements that you see on the artboard behave like layered objects. In Photoshop, you're working with layers, but the objects are actually made of pixels and not vectors. And so you're dealing with little dots of information per square inch of your document. So anyway, today I'm working with a demonstration file called Fish. You can find this in the Resource Files folder in the Course Content section of Blackboard. And when you open up this document, it'll look just like this. You'll also notice that it's kind of a grainy image. That's because this is a very low resolution file. It's a 72 dpi. So that's why the when you zoom in, the graphics look kind of what I call sawtooth, where you can actually see the pixels. But that's okay. It's not the greatest quality image, but it's a great example of how to compose a scene in Photoshop using multiple layers. So once you get this file open in Photoshop, I want you to make sure that you have your layers window open. And so once you open the layers window, you will see that there is a specific layer for each visual element that you see in this document. You'll also notice that the layers for this document are all very well named. So they're not just random names like layer 1, layer 2, layer 3, and so on, but they have very specific names assigned to them. And that is good work practice when working in any kind of graphic design illustration program where you use layers. It's very important to come up with a naming convention that is coherent and makes sense to you, so that it's easy for you to locate specific elements within a scene and be able to drill down very quickly where those elements live within the layer order. So you can see that we have a bubbles layer, and you'll also notice that each layer has a little eyeball in the column to the far left hand side. These are your visibility buttons, and you can turn them on and off to be able to see for yourself which layer controls which specific content in the composition window. All right, and so what I want to go over today, aside from looking at the layers window, I want to do a demonstration on the different tools that you will use for making selections in Adobe Photoshop. So as I was saying, making selections are quite different than how you go about making selections in Adobe Illustrator. Remember, in Illustrator, we were working with graphics that behave like layered objects, and so the selection process was very straightforward. You choose one of the two selection tools, click on the object that you want to interact with, and it will select the object in its entirety. And then it'll allow you to move it, rotate it, scale it, and just do a number of other things to it. In Photoshop, making selections depends on how you choose to select an area or a grouping of pixels. So let's just start first off with the basic Move tool. I'm going to select this tool, and notice that as soon as I click on this tool and select it, there is a bounding box that shows up around my composition window. What this bounding box is indicating to me is a surrounded area of pixels that have been selected, and it's basically everything on the layer that is selected in the layers window. So you can see that my yellow fish layer is the highlighted layer. It's shaded this lighter shade of gray. That means that it's selected. And that means that with the move tool selected, everything on this layer is going to be affected when I click and to actually select the material on this layer and move it around. You can see that it moves all of the bubbles on this layer. Now it switched layers just a second ago. And the reason why is because the bubbles is at the top of the stack. And so when I thought I was interacting with the yellow fish layer, as soon as I clicked on the work area, it reselected a new layer, which is the bubbles layer, which is at the top of the stack. And so that's why you saw the bubbles moving around as I picked them up and moved them. So that's one way that you can select a group of pixels. Very straightforward. Use the move tool, select a layer, but what happens is it's going to select all of the content on that layer. So no matter how much content you have living on that layer, everything will move in unison. Everything will move together on that layer. I'm going to turn off some of these layers, and I'm actually going to turn my attention to the background layer and then move on to another selection tool. These are called the marquee selection tools. If I click and hold the mouse button down, you can see that I have an option between two different types of shape marquee selection tools to choose from. So I can choose the rectangle marquee tool or the elliptical marquee tool. And what this tool does is it allows you to select an area of pixels that will be in the configuration or isolated to the shape of this selection bounding box. Once I click with the mouse button and hold it down and drag to create a selection area. I'm still holding my mouse button down at the moment, and if you pay close attention, you can see that those little dashed lines are actually marching. And you'll hear me refer to those as marching ants. A lot of people call those marching ants. But what these marching ants are telling us is that everything inside of this rectangular marching ant area is selected. So all of the pixels in this window are selected. Now I'm going to release my mouse button and show you that that area will remain selected. I want to make sure that I have my background layer selected and not any of my other layers. And then using the move tool, if I just click inside of that selection area and click and hold the mouse button and drag, you can see that it created like a cookie cutter kind of stamp of selecting those pixels and letting me remove them from that selected area. And I can continue to pick up this shape and move it around using the move tool and clicking and dragging with the mouse. I can continue to interact with this collection of pixels as a layered object like you see here, moving this around. I'm still on the background layer, but as soon as I deselect this and move on to another tool, these pixels will then become merged with its original layer, and I will not be able to access that collection of pixels exactly in the same way once I move on. So to demonstrate that, I just pressed Command D on my keyboard, and that essentially deselected my object or my selection area of pixels. And now you can see that what was my selected area of pixels has now become deselected and has now merged with the entire background layer. Now I can actually, if I don't make any more selections, and I want to reselect that same shape, I can still do that as long as I don't change my selection to, another area of my artboard. So if I need to go back and reselect that shape, I can, as long as I don't work beyond that particular step. So to reselect an area of pixels, you can do this quite simply by going to Select in the menu bar and choose Reselect. Now it's reselected that area of pixels again, but here's what happens. If I use the move tool to pick this up and move it, now it's cut out even more of an area of pixels. So it's still going to behave like a cookie cutter. All right. So again, if I deselect at this point in my work area, you can see that this shape has now merged with the background pixels surrounding that. And so if I were to use the move tool now and try to move this one shape, I would actually move everything on this layer. I'm going to Command Z to undo that. I can still bring this selection back up, but when I do that, it's not going to behave like a layered object. It's going to once again create another cookie cutter stamped hole into my background of pixels. If I go to select, reselect, and interact with that shape and move it to a new location, you can see that it's now punched another hole into my scene or my collection of pixels. All right, I'm going to undo these. So that's one way that you can make, another way that you can make selections. So one way is to use the move tool and select a layer, which will allow you to basically just move everything on that layer all at the same time without singling out one aspect of content on that layer all by itself. It moves everything together. You can also rotate all the content together on that layer as well with this tool selected. Then you can move on to the basic shape. That's what I'll call these. Marquee selection tool. So it will select an area of pixels in the shape of a rectangle or an ellipse. One more thing that I want to note about the basic shape selection tools is that you don't always have to have a crisp edge, cookie cutter edge. You can actually feather the edge of the selection area. And so if I want to use this tool if I want to use this tool to cut a rectangular shape, but I don't want it to have a crisp edge, I'd rather it have more of a soft, feathery kind of edge, then I will set the feather pixel radius up here in the control bar. Right now it's set to 0, so that gives us the sharp, crisp edge. If I set this to say, let's say 20 pixels, that means that it will make a selection within a 20 pixel range of probably 10 pixels in either direction on either side of this selection line here, the marching ants. So now when I pick up this shape and move it, hold on a second. I have to switch to the move tool to do this part. Then I can pick it up and move it. It still didn't feather it. Hang on a second. Maybe I need to actually redraw the selection area once I create the feather radius. So I'm going to click and drag and create an ellipse. Now go to the move tool. And now you can see when I click and drag and move this shape, you can see how soft this edge is for the cut line. So I'll just undo that and take that back. So you can, alter the appearance of a selection that's made with the basic shape selection marquee tools. You can have a 0 feather radius, or you can have, a wide feather radius and end up with an edge that's very soft and feathery. Another way that you can make selections of pixels in Photoshop is to use the lasso tool. So the lasso tool has several different options. And just remember that if there is a triangle in the bottom right hand corner, that means that there are more options to choose from for that tool. And so you can access those options by clicking and holding the mouse key down, and a separate menu will expand, revealing the rest of the options that you have available to you. So there are two different lasso tools. There's just the regular lasso tool and the polygon lasso tool. So the lasso tool is a great option for when you just need to make kind of a free form kind of selection. And so you would just, you could either use a drawing tablet, a digitizing tablet with a stylus pen to click and drag or click and draw a shape in a very freehand organic kind of approach and end up with a very freehand organic kind of selection area. Or you can use the polygon lasso tool, which allows you to make free form or freehand selections, but by pulling straight line segments. So by clicking and releasing and dragging, now I've come around full circle. I'm getting ready to close this selection area. And notice that when I have finished, establishing the selection area, you can see that the marching ants run in straight lines. So those are two different ways that you can use the lasso tool. If I jump to the move tool, now you can see when I pick up and move this selection, the kind of shape that it makes. All right, another great tool is the Magic Wand tool. And this tool makes selections based on color information. So, what that means is when I select a range of pixels or a grouping of pixels, depending on what my tolerance is set at, that will depend on how my pixels are selected based on color information. So let's say I set this, usually the tolerance is usually set around 32. That's kind of the default. Let me turn off these marching ants here. Command D to deselect, and now I'll go back to my Magic Wand tool. So the default setting is usually 32 for the tolerance. So what that means is it will select, well, a tolerance of 32 pixels, ranging from the color and the value of the actual pixel that you select by clicking on, and it will include surrounding pixels that are contiguous to the original pixel that you just selected, based on a range of color values for that hue, or hue values, or values for that hue, that range within a 32 pixel range. So for instance, with this set to 32 pixels, if I click in this dark blue area of this background underwater scene, you can see that it selects a pretty large range or area of these dark blue pixels. Now, if I zoom in really close, you'll be able to see that there's actually quite an array. Well, it's kind of hard to see because my grid is on, but there's actually a variety of values in this deep dark blue range. So there's some, slightly lighter values of this dark blue, and then slightly much darker values of this dark blue that all fit within this 32 pixel range. Now, if I were to lower that tolerance, then my selection would become much more discriminate. So that means that if I lower the tolerance, then it's going to be more judicious in how the Magic Wand tool selects the pixels based on color information, and specifically pixels that are contiguous in relationship to the pixel that you originally click on. So I'm going to lower the tolerance to say 10, something that's quite different. And I'm going to Command D to deselect the area of pixels that I just had selected. And now, using the Magic Wand tool, when I click inside this area, you can see that there are areas within the original selection area that did not make it into the selection. And that's because they fall out of that range of hue and value tolerance. I'm going to lower this down to 5, and let's see what we get. I'm going to Command D to deselect the selection area, and then select once again with my Magic Wand. And now you can see with the tolerance set to 5, there's even more areas of pixels inside of the original selection range that have been excluded from that selection area. If I experiment over here in these mid-tone value ranges of this blue hue with the tolerance set to 5, it picks up, you know, this whole range of pixels here. But when I look at these, I can tell that for the most part, these are all they all appear to be the same intensity of blue or the same value of blue. Let's just take the tolerance down to 0 and see what happens. So when you take it all the way down to 0, now it's telling me, okay, so I am only going to continue to select all of the contiguous pixels that are exactly the same, you know, RGB or CMYK percentages that make up this specific blue, and the exact same value range, meaning light or darkness of this color blue. And so right now it is being you know, very judicious in the pixels that it will allow in this selection. It's basically saying you're either 100% this color and value or you're not. And if you're not, then you don't make it in the selection. Now if we increase the value range a little bit, let's shoot it up to maybe 10. So now you can see it's included more into the selection. So it's allowing more of these pixels within that 10 pixel range of color and value. I'll have to just kind of experiment with these because I'm so used to the Magic Wand tool. I use this one a lot. I don't use the Quick Selection tool quite so much, or the Object Selection tool, but let's check it out. So the Quick Selection tool looks like it uses a brush of some kind. And we have what appears to be a standard Quick Selection, an add and a subtract. I'm going to lower this brush size because I think that 194 brush size is pretty huge. Oh, nice. Okay. So it kind of works similar to the Magic Wand tool. It appears to make selections based on color information. If I choose the subtract, that allows you to subtract, just kind of drawing the selection area, which is kind of interesting. So let's say you're trying to capture just this dark blue area, and maybe I want to remove this lighter part and just stick with the dark blue. I will use my subtract selection tool and see if that lets me kind of take a bite out of it, and it did. So it's all about selecting the pixels. Now, we have experimented a lot on this background layer, which is all just this blue color with different values of this blue, of, you know, ranging from light to dark. But let's look at some of these other layers here and what's going on. I'm going to Command D to deselect that, and I'm going to lock this background layer. And the reason why I'm going to lock it is because I don't want to accidentally select any of the pixels on this layer for this part of the demonstration, and I'm going to be doing a lot of clicking around on top of it. And so as you saw earlier, as I was trying to demonstrate how to pick up content on the entire layer and move it, I kept accidentally selecting other, you know, layers in this stacking order, and that's because they were all unlocked and vulnerable to being selected depending on where I clicked in the composition window. So to make sure that you don't disturb any of the content that's there, and you want to make sure that it's visible but safe and secure from being accidentally selected, make sure that you select the layer that you want to lock, and then go right up here to the top of, or close to the top of the layer window, and choose the Lock All icon. And so it looks like a little padlock. Don't choose this lock option. This lock option just locks pixels on a layer, and I will demonstrate what that means here momentarily. But first I'm going to open up this purple fish layer, or make it visible by turning the visibility button on. And I'm going to demonstrate once again the Move tool. So if I select the Move tool and then I select the purple fish layer. If I just click and hold the mouse button down and move the mouse around, you can see it moves all the fish. So they all stay in their same position, but they all move together as a cohesive whole, as if they're all one unit. Now, if I want to single out one of these fish and just reposition one of the fish and leave the rest where they are, well, then I will choose a different tool that will allow me just to single out one fish without gathering all of them. Now, I can use the rectangle marquee tool and click and drag a selection box around this purple fish right here. Use the move tool and pick this guy up and move it anywhere I want. Now, the reason why I have this bounding box around my selected item is because up here in the control bar at the top of the window, I have a box checked for Show Transform Controls. Now, if I didn't have this selected, then I would just see marching ants and I'd be able to move my selected object, but I wouldn't have access to any other controls like being able to rotate or scale this object. But if I have this box checked, that will enable the transform controls, which will allow me to rotate this shape depending on where I place the cursor. I can scale the object just by clicking and dragging these scaling handles. And so, in addition to moving this shape around, so I can do, quite a bit more with the move tool if I have that option selected. I can also use the elliptical marquee tool. Let me select this little guy back here. First, I need to deselect that area. I'm not sure why it's giving me that message. Let's try a different tool. I use my lasso tool and use my move tool to pick up this little fish and move it around. So it allowed me to select it just like the basic shape marquee selection tool did, except the approach of executing it was a little bit different. I actually clicked and drew the selection area instead of clicking and dragging to create a selection area shape. All right, and so in addition to selecting pixels just so that you can move them, rotate them, and scale them, you can also select pixels just to delete something if you want. So you can delete an object quite simply. We use the polygon lasso tool this time, and just click and drag and click and drag until I complete my selection area. And then I can switch to the move tool and then hit delete. Oh, I thought I could hit delete. Make sure the layer is selected and then hit delete, and then it just deletes that fish. So that's one way to do it. Another way that I can get rid of pixels without even having to select a single thing at all is to use the eraser tool. So I'm going to deselect what I just had selected, and I'm going to hop down here just a few tools down to the eraser tool. We also have the magic eraser tool and the background eraser tool. Feel free to experiment with those, but the most important one that you need to know about is just the basic eraser tool. Now, when I select this tool, you can see up here in the toolbar at the top, I can erase in opacities or transparency. So I can either do, strike through and erase 100% area of pixels, or I can create more of a feathered kind of effect with my erasing, depending on what I have the opacity set at. I can also adjust the brush size for an eraser. So erasers use brush sizes. That's how you set the size of your eraser, by setting its diameter. Right now my eraser is 65 pixels wide. That's kind of big. So I'm just going to get a much smaller eraser. And I'm just going to scrub these numbers down. And so I've got, I lowered mine down to 6. And then I can just erase an area of pixels just by striking through whatever it is I have selected. So I had the purple fish layer selected. So any of these purple fish that I run the eraser through by clicking and dragging that it will wipe out pixels in the path of that eraser. I'm just going to Command Z and undo those. All right, so that concludes this demonstration video on just getting the basics of the work area in Adobe Photoshop and how to select pixels and understanding how we use layers in Adobe Photoshop. So I hope you enjoyed this demonstration, and in the next video we're going to explore how to use some photo retouching tools. So we're going to interact directly with pixels by selecting them in a variety of ways, using whatever tool works best for the task at hand. And then I'm going to show you how to use some of the photo editing tools to erase things like dust and scratches and smears and things like that on old photos.